And now I got this brace cut and narrowed. You can see I've got some overlap over here in the middle. So what I got to do is cut right down the middle of this and weld this together, then I can shorten the brace. There's my two cut pieces, right? You see it burning my skin as my skin touches it, it's so hot. But now I come together and weld them and then move forward with lowering the brace to the tire. This brace is right about 1.25 inches over the top of the tire. I need about a 1/4 inch clearance. So I'm gonna take 1 inch out of it and I'm gonna remove that inch right here. Here's a little fabricating trick for you in case I haven't showed this to you before, or if you're a new subscriber or a new viewer, let me go and show this to you. A lot of times when I'm over here welding on the bike, I don't want to have to take everything apart and go over to a welding table. So I have a piece of 1-inch thick steel plate that I just throw up here on my motorcycle lift. And I use that as my makeshift welding table. You don't have to use 1-inch thick. You can use 1/4 inch thick or 1/2 inch or 3/8 or whatever. I happen to have had a piece of 1-inch thick steel plate for decades. I've had this since back in the very first biker build-off days. That's how I've done everything, but I'm able to ground right to the plate. Then I set my part up, and you see I've got the brace there with a V-block holding it down. I've already got it set up to weld. Then I can just come right over here to the bike, weld, go right from that steel plate to the bike for fitment, back to the plate, back to the bike. It'll be back on and off several times before I'm done. And that way it saves me a lot of time, and I'm right here at the bike with all the tools I need, the wrenches and anything else I need to set this up, all my measuring tools. So it's really convenient. Highly recommend to get yourself a piece of steel plate. Aluminum will work too. Aluminum's a lot easier to lift. This plate probably weighs 80, 85, 90 pounds, which is nothing to me, but if you don't want to lift something heavy, you can use aluminum plate and ground to the aluminum plate. That'll work too. That brace is welded on the left side. You see I've used a wrench in there just to give me my clearance between the brace and the tire to hold it steady. You see how much lower it is over top of the tire now. Considerably lower. It's going to have a way better look when it's all done. Now I'll go ahead and do the right side. I've got 3/4 inch difference between the right side and the left side, so I'm going to go ahead and take 3/4 inch out of this brace right here, and they should line right up in the middle. I'm just going to weld this bridge section here over this fender strut right here on the bike. Just a tack weld because the heat's going to want to pull it. So I push it down. Now let me show you what we got here. I got the fender strut narrowed and shortened. Now, remember that I told you I wanted about a 1/4 inch between the tire and the fender strut? Well, these are 1-inch thick precision plates that I use for spacing stuff out, and 2 of the 1-inch thick plates makes a 1/4 inch, so that's my distance from the tire to the strut right there. It's narrowed. I had to end up putting a little section in the middle to get it even and level the way I wanted it, but that worked out just fine. I welded that in. Now I can go ahead and narrow the fender and mount everything together. Here we go again. Here's the fender. Even though I have the strut lowered, you see how wide the fender is. It just looks horrible on the tire, from the rear, from the side, from the top, everything. And this bike's up on a stand, so when you actually put it on the ground, you're really gonna have a horrible downward view, bird's eye view of it. So I'm gonna take a bunch of material out of the fender. And how I'm gonna do it is, I'm gonna narrow the fender so it matches the strut right here. I'm gonna measure the inner width of my strut what'll fit inside these side skirts. I'm gonna cut that material out of the middle of the fender and then weld the fender back together. All right, so I measured this fender. I use a seamstress tape. These things are invaluable if you're fabricating. But I measure across, and the fender's 7 inches on the inside. So I want to make it 5 inches. On the outside, I'm going to measure how wide the fender is in total. So my center line is right here at 5 1/4. So I'm going to mark it here. And I'll mark it down here. See, this weld is off center where they tack welded this plate on the bottom. So don't believe that tack weld mark for a second for the center line. But I'll come down here a little more and go to 5 1/4. I'll keep marking my center line all the way down so I know the center of this fender. You see these holes don't really appear to be on center. And if you believe the holes, good for you, but I'm telling you they're off. So this fender is made in Taiwan. They use the metric system there. So I'm going to keep going around and measuring 5 1/4 from this edge. That'll get me real close to having a good center line. And even if it isn't the true center, that's okay. We're going to make this work. One more there, and then one more here. Right now, I'm going to run alongside those lines I just drew. I'm going to hang a little bit to this side to give thickness for my pen. Run this piece of masking tape down the middle. All right. Now this is a piece of 1-inch thick wide masking tape. And I want to take 2 inches out of the center of this fender. So now I'm just going to run another piece of 1-inch masking tape right next to it. And that should give me a 2-inch cut. There you go. So that's basically what I'm going to cut out of the center of this fender. Now I'm just going to take my marker and draw my cut line right along the edge of that tape. I pull the tape. There's my cut line. So I'm going to remove all this material out of the middle of the fender. Have me a nice bobber fender for this bike. All right, so to cut this, I used to do it on a bandsaw. The problem with a bandsaw is you get a jagged cut because the saw is only, a 1/2 inch wide. I use a big 4-inch cutting disc or a 7-inch cutting disc because the width of the cutting disc makes me stay straight in my cut once I get a good straight start. It helps me guide me through the cut so that when I make the two fender halves together, I have a nice match to weld my seam. So I'm gonna go ahead, I use a face shield, I suit up, I got gloves on, I got a heavy hoodie on so that if this cutting wheel explodes, got a little bit of protection, hopefully it's enough, but here goes. Here's the fender cut. You can see I don't have a perfect cut, but I'll go ahead and clean up this seam, fit it together really good, tack it, and ultimately get myself a nice joint the whole way down. There's the fender just kind of sitting up. You can see it's starting to diverge in the front here, and that's because this chain cutout, when you narrow the fender, the chain cutout hits the side of the tire. So I'm gonna go ahead and eliminate this whole piece in here in the chain cutout so that it won't interfere with the tire. And that'll allow me to pull the front together. But you can kind of start to see just from how I have it clipped, how much closer, tighter it fits. And it's still high and it's still wide because of that gap. But once I pull it all together and tack it and push it down, you'll see it gives a very nice fit. And that's what we're looking for here. Got to have that perfect look, that perfect fit. My weld, it's a little fusion weld. I don't need any filler rod. It's just a nice tight seam, a real narrow heat affected zone. I'll go ahead and hit this weld with the belt sander just to smooth it all out real good. Then I'll take it to my Bailey planishing hammer, which will strengthen the weld and flatten the fender out. All right, it's getting ready to get real loud in here. So I'm gonna put the fender now. I've sanded down the welds, and I'm gonna go ahead and put the fender in the planishing hammer. And what will happen is this reciprocating hammer will flatten out the welds, which will make them more dense and stronger, but also it'll flatten the fender out and level it out. So planishing hammer makes quick work of that seam. I got a real nice flat surface now. The body man doesn't have to do a whole lot of work to it. I can fill if I want, but I'm not going to bother because he's just going to skim the whole fender anyhow. You know, it's a painted Harley-Davidson fender, so he's going to skim it, but looks real good and solid. It's not going to break. It's not going to come apart. That weld's as strong as they get. So, thanks. Great to be a part of the Bailey Army. The fender's welded together. I went over it with the Bailey planishing hammer to smooth it out. You can see how much better it fits the tire. It diverges in the front there, but you're not going to see any of that for a couple reasons. One, I have the enclosed chain guard that goes here, so you won't even notice that. But you can see really around the back from how it looks from where it was in the very beginning, that it has a much better fit. It's lower to the tire. It's going to look great, especially once I get the tail light and the tag bracket on it, because it's going to cover this gap here. And you'll see what I mean when I get that done. But what I've done is I've clamped the fender to the struts. I'm going to take the wheel out and go ahead and tack weld the fender to the struts so that it stays centered just like I have it right now. Go ahead and drill these holes for the tail light and tag bracket. I use a step drill, which is nice because it allows me to go into the fender, and then the step will keep the drill from going into the tire and puncturing the tire. Here's the tail light, tag light, brake light assembly I'm going to use. The tag bracket's right here, so the tag will hang down off the back of the tire. But what really is neat about this is I'm using the 1930s steel shroud to go on it. And normally this would be silver soldered to the fender, but I'm gonna use brass screws to bolt it down. It'll give it a really cool, different look. The brass screws will kind of pop against some of the other accents, but I've got to get these wires out of the way, and I got to clearance it for these rivets in the fender here. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now, and then I'll fit it tight, drill it, and this thing's ready to go off to paint. Here's a look at this fender with the strut all welded in. I got the taillight screwed on with the brass screws. I think you can see how those screws look good. And look at from the side how the tag bracket goes down and follows the back of the tire. So when you see it from the rear, you don't see the gap in the fender. Really great vintage style and look to it. I feel really good about how this came out. I'm gonna take the fender off. It's going right to Milkbone in Orlando, Florida for paint. Be back in a week or two. I'll be putting the bike back together and I'll show it to you when I get it done. I got the Springer partially assembled. I had Milkbone paint the Springer legs. I've never seen this done before, but I think it looks phenomenal on this. With the stars and stripes for the 250th birthday of the United States of America. I was at the 200th in 1976 in Philadelphia with my family. My mom's from Philly. So it's kind of cool 50 years later to be putting this thing together. Milkbone did an awesome job. I'm gonna get the front end in the frame, get the front wheel on it so I can anchor it in my stand here. So when I go to put the engine and transmission and stuff, the whole frame and everything isn't flopping around. So I'm gonna go ahead and slide this up in there. I got my bearings already installed with grease. It should be a pretty easy install here. You know, I already had this whole thing assembled once before and then took it apart for paint. So I'm at that point now where it's just as simple as put it back together. I've kind of already pre-fit everything so that this shouldn't be too difficult. I probably shouldn't say that, but this reminds me of biker build-off. You know, this is the night before I'm supposed to leave, and you know, I'm putting my stuff together. That's kind of how it always was. Maybe that's how it's always going to be. I don't know, but I'm pretty excited. This is my favorite part of building a bike, is when everything's done and painted and polished and plated and finished, and you get to put it all back together and really see all the hard work and planning pay off in the assembly. My favorite part. So very exciting for me, and this thing will be down in Daytona raising eyebrows in a couple of days. Solid wheel discs, kind of a 50s period accessory that I just think really makes these bikes look so good. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the front wheel in, and you really see how that wheel disc makes that painted Springer pop. Been working for a while, but I don't have that much done. As you can see, I got the front wheel on, the front end on, the rear stand on, just to hold the bike up. And now I've got the bike clamped in a cycle vise, so when I go to put heavy things in, like the transmission and the engine, it doesn't want to flop all over my workbench. I'm gonna go ahead and put the gearbox in. I put my enclosed chain guard on it. I get my rear wheel and fender. The rear wheel and fender have to go in. I get the fender so tight to the tire that you can't just pull the tire out. A lot of times you have to deflate the tire, loosen the fender struts, and wiggle everything out. Just the way the drum brake and the way the frame is designed in the 30s, that's just the nature of the beast. That's why when you see the fender usually sits so high off the tire and it's so much bigger around, that gives you room to get the tire in and out. The way I do it, you just have to loosen the fender up a little bit, deflate the tire, and get it out. So go ahead and get all that stuff in and get all that in, and then we'll start moving toward the handlebars, engine, gas tanks, seat, exhaust, that type of stuff. So watch me roll it. I took the transmission apart and went through it on the inside, replaced the shift clutches and one of the gears and one of the shafts, but it's an original 1947 Harley-Davidson big twin flathead or big twin knucklehead gearbox. I left all the skank finish on it that's been on it since the 40s probably, but it is new on the inside, and I'll go ahead and get it in here. This is gonna ride behind that S&S Knucklehead and get us down the road. This kind of tricky little operation here. I gotta mount this oil tank to the base plate, but there's bolts that go through the base plate and the oil tank, and they need a spacer, so you gotta kind of hold all this stuff together. I always do it like this. I fold in, put the base plate on, I put the one spacer on and kind of hold it all together. Then you gotta get this oil tank up here in the bike. And I start the one side. And you just gotta get the threads started straight. That's the hardest thing. I get the threads started straight. Put the spacer under the bottom. And kind of hold it in there. I got my coil mount here, so you gotta kind of wiggle the bolt in at an angle. And then get it started. Once you get it started, it's pretty easy. Starting to get a little bit of a motorcycle going here. You know, I'm really excited about getting the back wheel and the fender on it. Once I have that stuff on, I gotta put the engine in. And getting the engine in is kind of tricky because the exhaust pipes on a Knucklehead, they squeeze between the engine and the frame right here. Comes in front of this front motor mount, comes down and then curves under and comes right here and then squeezes out past this brake and transmission. So it's kind of a trick getting all that in. So you have to kind of put the engine and the pipe in at the same time. Once you get the engine in, you can't get the pipe in. So I'll get this oil tank mounted, get the back wheel going with the chain guard and everything else, and then we'll get to the Knucklehead engine from S&S. All right, to me, the paint, the wheel covers, and the rear chain guard just really set this bike apart from anything else. This is a superior rear enclosed chain guard. It's a real period specific piece. This isn't a reproduction, it's a real deal. And it encloses the rear chain and keeps it really clean and keeps, if you never ride a Knucklehead or a big flathead or Panhead, Shovelhead, you know, you get chain oil on you. And these enclosed chain guards keep you clean and also just look really cool. Once the whole bike is together, you'll see how neat this really makes it look with that wheel disc behind it. It's just a really great piece. So I've got it in here loose right now. This is like a trick, like I was saying. I got to kind of put it in loose, get the wheel in with the brake and the wheel covers, everything's loose. Then I throw the chain in, get everything together, and tighten the fender up all at the same time. It's kind of a magic trick, but I'll get it all together. You'll see how good it looks. All right, here's the rear fender. And here's the 1930s Harley-Davidson fender shroud that's gonna go on it. Normally, I would silver solder this on, but if you look back at the video, when I was fabricating everything, I held it on with little number 6 brass screws. So I love this brass screws because the brass is gonna pop off the gold that's in the little dots here in the stripe. And it also pops off the gold that's in the Harley-Davidson Speedball logo decal that goes on the gas tanks when I put them on. So all these little accents of the gold and the brass are really gonna pull together nicely. There's not a whole lot of custom fabrication on this bike other than the rear fender and the exhaust. So you gotta really pull off some magic with the little details like the brass and the chain guard and the wheel disc. So those are the little things that are gonna set this bike apart. All right, there's a good look at the rear fender with the taillight shroud and the wheel with the disc cover. And that seat from Kurt from Bare Bones, I mean, just the way it fits and flows into the fender. You know, once this bike is together, you're really gonna see it all come together nice. There's some nice details here, man. This thing's gonna be special. I'm excited about it. Well, let's get that Knucklehead engine in there. And boom, she's in. Now the trick is, I gotta get that front exhaust pipe in here before I finalize anything, because if I don't get it in there, then I'll never get it in. I'm getting the drive line set up on the bike now. I got the inner primary cover on, the clutch hub. I'm getting ready to put the belt drive on it. It would normally have a chain drive that would run the primary from the engine to the transmission. It's called your primary drive. But the thing with the chain drive is the chain stretches. And every time the chain stretches, you have to move the transmission back to tension the chain. When you move the transmission back, the shift rod that comes from here to the fuel tank has to be readjusted in the gate on the tank. So it's kind of a lot of work to have a primary chain drive. So I run a belt on it. The belt will usually only stretch once and then it'll stay that same length. I never stretch anymore. And the customer who owns the bike won't have to deal with always adjusting that stuff. Here's your clutch lever. It has a rod that pulls it here, but when I pull that lever, there's the SSKN 93 Knucklehead engine, and I'm doing a little something to this thing. I'm putting twin Linkert carburetors on it. I made the intake manifold, and I'm putting the two Linkerts on it. You know, this engine comes with the S&S Super E carburetor that you know, S&S manufacturers, but back in the day, this is supposed to be a period build bike. And back in the day when this bike would have been running the streets in the 50s, George Smith hadn't developed a carburetor yet. So he would have done what I'm doing, which is put two Linkerts on it to be able to get more fuel and air into the engine. So check this out as it comes together. Well, this feels like biker build off. I'm working through the night, no break, no nothing, just work until it's done. It's got to get done. It has to be in Daytona in a day and a half, and it takes a full day to get there from Nashville. So I'm kind of looking for a little bit of inspiration. So I'm gonna hang this one left side tank. The right side tank I'll leave off for now because I'm working on the carburetors over there. But I'm gonna put this tank on, and just seeing it on the bike, the job that Milkbone did on this paint is phenomenal. So it'll inspire me every time I step back and look at it. I'll say, okay, dude, just keep on working. So this is how I motivate myself. People say, I don't know how you do it, man. Well, this is how I do it. So I sent Milkbone the Harley-Davidson Speedball decals and told him paint it just like you'd paint an original 1930s Knucklehead, but do the red, white, and blue with maybe a little bit of gold accent. And he's the artist, so I always tell him, hey, you're the artist. You know, this is my idea, my concept, but you execute it the way you want to. And he sent this back, and I really love what he did. It's not the way I envisioned it, but I love what he did. It's gonna look great on this bike. A little bit of gold in the emblem pops with a little bit of brass on the intake clamps and the brass screws on the taillight. It all really come together once the bike's done. You see, these got shipped to me overnight, and they literally arrived falling out of the box. So there's some damage there. I don't have time to fix it. I'm buying another set of tanks and getting them painted, and I'll swap them out sometime on the tour. But you can see how all this stuff just really pulls together to make this a pretty interesting motorcycle. All right, I got the one Linkert carb mounted on there. I go ahead and rebuild these all inside, make sure everything's good, but I leave them old and crusty on the outside. I think it's a really cool look. The few old crusty parts against really nice, beautiful paint. I've always kind of liked that. I would take a bike where the frame and the engine and everything is just, you can tell it's been used for decades, and then the paint's brand new. I just really like that a lot. I've got the one carburetor working perfectly now off of the cable. Now I just need to bridge between these two throttle blocks, and I'll have them gang together. So I just gang them together with a piece of the throttle cable that goes through the handlebars. You can use a piece of stainless steel TIG wire. You know, anything that's good and stiff will do it. There's really no resistance in the carburetors. They move real easy. So I just go ahead and tighten it down on this one, get it all the way to the throttle stop. I'll pull this one to the throttle stop, tighten it down also, and then they're gang together. A few years ago, my friend Caleb Owens, he's got Crow Customs out in California. He's a homeboy, a friend of mine from Miami. I've known him since I was a kid. Sent me this Springer top clamp that's really cool, and I've been just waiting for the right project. I loved it as soon as he sent it to me. It's just such a nice piece. I've been waiting for the right project, and it just hadn't come along until now. So Hollister is the right project. So these two stems that rise up on either side of the top clamp, and they're really for like a higher bar, but high bars won't look good on this bike. So I'm gonna cut these down an inch and a half, and then I'm gonna weld in these slugs that hold the brass risers that I'm using, and it'll make the bike look a lot better. The bike looks great. The handlebars are just a little bit too high. I know it's not much, inch and a half, doesn't seem like that much, but it's too much. It's gonna make a huge difference in how the bike rides and looks. So I'm gonna cut these down, weld those slugs in, get the handlebars on, and move on. I'm going to weld these steel slugs in to the Crow Customs top clamp. As soon as that's done, I'm going to get it ready to go back on the bike and get my handlebars down. I was able to drop them 1.25 inches, which is the most I could go, but that 1.25 inches is going to make a huge difference in how this thing looks. Little details like that, it took me a couple hours to do this, but little details like that separates a good bike from a great bike. And I intend for this one to be a great one. I weld my seat bracket tab on the frame. It's an afterthought. I've had to scuff back the paint where I had the frame painted. But you can see I marked the center line of the frame there. I marked the side where it needs to go underneath here, kind of like crosshairs basically, where the thing is. And I marked the center line of my part. And what I do is I use a piece of, so I'm using a 5/16 bolt through this billet slug that I machined. This is a piece of 5/16 rod. So when you come back to the back, so you have a V-block set behind it, but I use that rod as a visual to keep me square in all three planes. The V-block helps me be square to the tube because the V rides the backbone of the frame. But you can see I'm down a little bit on the right. So and when I tack weld, it's gonna pull, but I push down a little bit, then I come back and get a better visual, and that's got me more straight. I know I'm probably not right on center, but I'll go ahead and tack it. When I tack it, it'll pull. Then I use that piece of rod to bend back around and get me square, and then I weld on the other side and get it so that everything fits right. But it's just how I do this kind of stuff. I wish I'd done this before I had the frame painted. I'll touch it up there. Hopefully, it's not too noticeable. All right, so I'm just gonna come in here and put a little tack weld on this and use my 5/16 rod, like I mentioned to you, to control the positioning of my billet slug. I gotta be real careful not to contact anything, because if I knock this even the slightest, it's gonna get out of whack. I have it positioned side to side, and I also have it so it's not rocking this way or rocking this way, so pretty delicate little operation here. Now I can remove my stop that I put in here, which is the piece I cut off of the Crow Customs top clamp, and my V-block. My tack weld on the front there holds my piece in place. And now I just got to get back here and make sure that everything is center. You see how it rocked just from the pull of the welding. But that's an easy fix. While it's still hot, I just push down on my piece of 5/16 rod. Come back and recheck it. A little better there. It might be off. Might be a little bit low on the right still. You can check it this way. I'm good to go to put that second weld on the back. I'm just doing a little double check with my seat bracket. I'm gonna make sure that it's going right down the middle. It's gonna get my seat centered on the bike and have it sitting level when I bolt it on. Check out the profile of that seat, man. Looks so good on the bike. Just flows right from the tank into the back fender, right up the taillight, boom. Hey, that should be the last welding that I gotta do on the bike. It's always been my steady belief that once a bike's painted, you shouldn't be welding on it anymore. Seldom is that the case. There's always something that needs to be done, it seems like. But anyhow, I'm gonna put the welding hood down, I'm gonna roll the cables up. I should be done welding on this bike, and the rest of it's just simple assembly. My brass riser clamps are for 1-inch handlebars, so I got a piece of 1-inch solid bar stock here in the vise, and I just use this to index the risers and tighten them down, because you don't want them coming loose while you're riding. See, I machined my slugs and welded them in from the top, and I'm able to bolt in from the bottom with button head stainless steel 1/2-inch bolts. And then these are gonna slide over the top of my springer and hold everything in place.